President Trump expands sanctions on Venezuela, freezing all government assets.
The White House banning disputed President Nicolas Maduro from doing business with the United States entities and our foreign partners.
This move comes after the United States recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate leader of Venezuela back in January. So let's bring in John Bolton, the White House National Security Advisor, who is on the road. I believe he's in Lima, Peru. He's in Peru right now. Mr. Bolton, good morning to you.
Glad to be with you.
So tell us about the sanctions the United States is slapping on Venezuela.
Well, President Trump has taken a very strong move here, imposing these sweeping sanctions, putting a full block, a full freeze on all assets of all parts of the government of Venezuela in the U.S., and also imposing sanctions or setting up the situation to impose sanctions on any person or business that does significant business with the government of Venezuela. So this goes well beyond anything we've done before, and really is a very strong move by the president.
So, John, in particular, you do this move, but to a degree, you have to be frustrated. How is Maduro last? And the answer has to be Cuba, Iran, and Russia. How have we pushed back on them?
Well, these sanctions that the president announced yesterday and that I'll be elaborating down here in Lima, Peru today are part of that. I've been meeting with officials from other governments who are part of the Lima Group, Western Hemisphere governments that oppose the Maduro regime. They're all strongly supportive of this new move, and I think there's a renewed sense of confidence here, a renewed determination that we have to see Maduro moved out of power. I think the regime's isolation is increasing. I think the people of Venezuela need this regime to be removed and the legitimate National Assembly government to take power and hold new elections. And that's really the new impetus I think we're going to get from the conference here today.
Okay, what do you make of North Korea launching these two short-range ballistic missiles? It's the fourth missile test in about 2 weeks.
Well, it looks like it's a testing series that they want to get this missile fully operational. They appear to be ballistic missiles. The president and Kim Jong-un have an understanding that Kim Jong-un is not going to launch longer-range, intercontinental-range ballistic missiles. And so I think the president's watching this very, very carefully.
And the fact is he does not want South Korea and the U.S. to go through our military exercises. And he's trying to intimidate us not to do that. And what's your reaction?
Well, there are joint exercises that are going on right now. They're what are called command post exercises. They're largely computer-driven. We think this is something that's consistent with the partnership we have with South Korea. North Korea has continued its exercises unabated, so they don't really have a lot to complain about.
All right, so let's talk about China. Yesterday, the impact of what's going on with their currency sent our stock market off the cliff yesterday, Mr. Bolton, as you know. We have since designated China as a currency manipulator. So explain to us what happens next. Do we go to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and complain about them, and then they do what?
Well, there are a variety of steps that denominating a country as a currency manipulator allows us to do, and going to the IMF is certainly one of them. I think the real issue here, and what President Trump has confronted going back months now with the tariffs that he's imposed on China, is decades of Chinese misbehavior, decades of China not living up to its commitments, fundamentally stealing our intellectual property, engaging in forced technology transfers, discriminating against American and other foreign companies. And this behavior was accepted by the United States for far too long. The president has said, I'm not going to accept it any longer. I think he's got broad support in Europe, Japan, the other countries that trade with China. This really goes to a very basic question. It's not just about trade balances. It's about whether China will act in a responsible fashion. The theft of our intellectual property, which gives them an enormous competitive advantage, is something that simply has to stop. If they're willing to stop it, I'm sure we can find ways to bring them more fully into the international system. If they're not willing to stop it, if they keep stealing from us and others, they're going to have to face the penalty. That's what President Trump has made clear.
Right. There's also a sense that if the U.S. deploys missiles in the region, they said they're going to do likewise, and we'll start a bit of an arms race there. But lastly, on Iran, it seems like that Foreign Minister Zarif is obsessed with you. He calls all actions the B-team actions, meaning after you. You guys have a long history of nothing but friction. The Brits have joined us now in guarding ships in the Strait of Hormuz. What else can you tell us is the next step as the Iranians have now taken a third commercial tanker?
Yeah, well, look, I couldn't care less about Javad Zarif. Let's get to the basics on that. I think the British move shows that we're determined to prevent Iran from disrupting the global flow of oil. But let me come back to China for a second. You know, I think you're referring to Secretary of Defense Mark Esper's comment the other day that we'd be willing to consider deploying intermediate-range missiles in the Far East. That's because China has already got thousands of such missiles deployed. They were not part of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, so they were free to do what they wanted. That's one reason President Trump withdrew from the treaty. We're talking only about defending our deployed forces, our allies in South Korea, Japan, and elsewhere. It's China that's built up its military forces and posed a threat. And it's part of the larger debate I think we need to have about what direction China is going in terms of its deployment of military forces, its economic policies, and a range of other issues, including how they behave domestically.
Well, we know you've got a big speech down there in Peru in about an hour and a half. Thank you very much, Mr. Bolton, for making us part of your day.
Thank you so much.